What's up? I'm Brian, the Theoretical Gamer, and about a month ago, a YouTuber named Eric from Bloat Games did a thing where he talked about the murder hobo, and I agree with basically what he said, but I'm gonna argue against terminology. It's just me being nitpicky. So I think I'll call this video, "What even is a murder hobo?" Well, this is my, again, language changes over time, and in day-to-day life, I'm more of a descriptivist than a prescriptivist when it comes to language and words. But this is just murder hobo as I see it, right? Nowadays, murder hobo is used to describe a hack and slash player, or perhaps a munchkin. The term munchkin seems to have fallen out of favor. You don't hear it that much anymore unless you're describing the delightful card game by Steve Jackson. The murder hobo seems to, and because by the end munchkin was just using, had lost any of its original meaning. It just basically meant any gamer I don't like. And a hack and slasher is basically just what Eric from Bloat Games decided, what he described as a murder hobo was a hack and slasher, someone who is primarily wants to go in there and kick some butt. So, okay, this is what a murder hobo is. It's not a character type. It's not a player type. It's a campaign model. Go back into the old days, the halcyon days of yore, when the hobby was fresh and new. Basically, you would have maybe Redbox or something, and you would open it up, and the people would sit down, and they would say, "Oh, cool," and they would make a fighter, and do we have to put anything in the name section? No, just make your fighter. And it's you would call him the fighter, the magic user, the thief, the heal bot. You're oh man, do I have to play the cleric? The idea of role-playing a relationship with a god and stuff like that. No, that hadn't been invented. So then you all created your characters, and you started the game at the mouth of the dungeon, right? Because that's where the game started. And you would go in, and you would immediately start. Okay, the mapper would. Okay, this is the map. I'm going to start mapping the room. It's a 10x10 room with a stone corridor going down. All right, to the east. Got it. Okay, I'll check for traps. How long will our torches last? It's all about, a bit of resource management, a bit of, careful checking, about learning the rules of dungeoneering. And you would go through it, and then at the end of it, if you survived, you would have basically a pile of loot and a pile of dead bodies left behind you, and that would really be it. And then you would use the loot to buy more equipment, not from the town or from the blacksmith or anything like that, from the player's handbook. And then the next game would start, and you would start at the mouth of the next dungeon. That was the earliest days. It was basically the hobby has grown and evolved since then. That kind of campaign, it would be for most modern gamers, it would be choosing to go back and play Space Invaders. You might do it for nostalgia reasons, or to see how your grandparents did it back in the day, but the hobby has moved on, right? But eventually these adventures would turn into campaigns, and the campaigns they developed a certain thread of continuity. So you would be in between, which basically just meant in between dungeons you would go to the town. And the town would be different every time. It'd be okay, you go into the town, or you go to the tavern. Okay, in the tavern, there's an old man sitting in the corner, and he's I know of a cave. Okay, we go to the cave. And then the adventure proper happens. And that was really it. And eventually, rivalries would happen, with NPCs, and eventually, maybe a story would happen. And eventually, but it grew out of that organically. It wasn't planned. It wasn't, didn't sit down and the DM didn't sit down and say, well, this will happen and this, this glorious epic tale will happen. It was a very picaresque. It was very, it was very. So what happened is, and then later on the hobby changed and grew and evolved, and the World of Darkness came out, and you had like character behavior built onto the character sheet, and you had Ron Edwards created a website called The Forge, and he came up with the GNS model and said, oh yeah, well, there's gaming philosophies of gamist, narrativist, and simulationist, and blah 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 and all that. And then you had, and and then years later, some old grognard is sitting there, like, oh, sipping Chateau Lafite. Oh yes, do you remember the olden days when the old campaigns we used to play? Oh yes, yes. I just came to a realization. Our characters were basically murderous hobos. I say, you're correct. That's exactly what our characters were, murderous hobos. We were homeless people who wandered from town to town accepting jobs, usually involving, killing and looting. And, we had no end goal in mind. We simply wanted money for its own sake. Well, to be honest, we wanted experience points. The money was simply a means to that end. Yes, quite so. Yes, how primitive we were in those days. Murderous hobos indeed. And that was really it. It was, and you might be heroic murder hobos. The term, and that's the term I heard used on a forum once, that looking back described old school campaigns as murderous hobos, and it was later, it caught people's imaginations and was shortened to murder hobo. But that was the style of campaign. It was basically a series of dungeon crawls with a thread of campaign connecting them. That was the murder hobo campaign. And so nowadays it's like you look back at it, it's like the people think of it as it somehow became hack and slash. You could be a murderer. You could be a heroic murder hobo. You could. There was such a thing. You might be a murder hobo who defended a town from goblin raids. You could be a murder hobo who rescued a princess. But at the core, you were basically homeless people trying to get loot and experience points. And oddly enough, I remember hearing about how like the original games was like by Gygax and Company were kind of like you weren't just collecting loot for no reason. You actually did have a goal. The basic goal of the earliest games was the quest for glory. The quest for glory, which was basically, the original games were meant to top out at about 14th level. That's why back in the old like box sets, when elf was a class, like the dwarf maxed out at 12th level, the elf maxed out at 10th, and the halfling at 8th, because you weren't really expected to go past 14th or so. The expert set topped out at 14th, and at that point you were supposed to retire your characters and get a castle or something, or whatever it is your character had, and live the good life off of all the loot that he had acquired. And that was it. That was, in a sense, that was what you were, the quest for glory. You had won. You could win D&D, and that was how, right? I think partly it was players not getting it, partly dungeon masters not giving them that because they just wanted to keep, keep giving them crap. But they were like, we want to go higher. So they, which is why they had to like figure out what to do with the demi-human races who once they started raising stuff to 36 level, they were stuck down at these pitiful levels. They had to figure out how to improve them from there, and it was. But the thing is, you had. So, like, if you looked at the companion and the master set, they basically had things about. They had rules about how to run armies and how to like fighting each other and how to maintain kingdoms. And I guarantee you, like 90% of the people just ignored those rules because they were like, why are these even here? We want to keep playing. You know, they wanted to continue murder hoboing. They wanted to continue and then you would get up to master level, and then, you know, like, we're 30th level. And they're walking in, these are like 30 level, like almost demigods. And I guarantee you, they're walking in, there's a campaign somewhere out there where the characters would walk into town, and an old man would be, I know of a cave, and the cave would be full of these ridiculously high level, like dragons and liches and stuff, because because that's, you know, it's like, because that's what they knew. The idea was they weren't, that's at the essence of a murder hobo campaign. You're not playing for any kind of goal. You're just playing to continue playing. But no, it's not so much a hack and slasher. You could be a very thoughtful and intelligent character who plots out the adventure very, very carefully, and, you know, but you're just there for that adventure, and then you're there for the next adventure. Anyways, that's my definition of murder hobo, and it's a campaign style. It's not a player type. Anyway, peace out.